So this is our second week of the Purposeful Learning Festival. We'll give you some updates at the end of the session as far as what we have coming through the rest of September. And of course, we'll continue to send you newsletters and announcements as well to keep you informed. So we look forward to continuing to have you here, hopefully. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today's session. I'm very excited about this session. We all are, in hosting Dr. Mays Ahmad. If you've been following the discussions in higher ed over the last year and a half and what we've been going through in the pandemic, you've possibly seen her publications, presentations, or references others have made to her work. It's been really critical and connected to what we're all going through as we continue to experience the pandemic and how it's impacting our personal lives and our professional lives. So Dr. Ahmad is a neuroscientist and professor of pathophysiology and biomedical ethics at Pima Community College, which is in Tucson, Arizona. She's the founding coordinator of their Teaching and Learning Center and is also a Gardner Institute Fellow. Her current research focuses on stress, self-awareness, advocacy, and classroom community, and how these impact student learning and success. Outside of the classroom, Dr. Ahmad works with faculty members across disciplines at her own institutions and across the country to promote inclusive, equitable, and contextual education, all rooted in the latest research on the neurobiology of learning. As a nationally recognized expert on trauma-informed teaching and learning, she passionately advocates for institutions to make mental health a top priority and to systematically support the education of the whole student. So it's my pleasure now to turn it over to Dr. Mays Ahmad.
Thank you so much for your kind invitation, and I want to thank all of you for joining me. I'm really grateful to be in community with you and to learn with you. I'm going to share some reflection and some perspectives that I have with respect to how we can move forward in turbulent times. And I recognize that you all come with wealth of experiences and wisdom and remarkable assets related to teaching and learning. So I want to invite you to share your experiences in the chat. You could share resources, tell us what you do. It will surely enhance the experience for all of us today. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint right now, and you will have a chance to have a copy of the presentation. And what I want to share with you are reflections on what it means to move forward and how we can leverage the power of connections and the power of meaning making to move forward and grow and heal in the process. And so I am going to also talk about the concept of trauma-informed education. I will tell stories and I will give practical examples throughout, and at the end I will give more practical strategies. I want to invite you to join me to read this poem and reflect on it. It is a poem called Think of Others, and it's written by the Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish. So he writes, as you prepare your breakfast, think of others. Don't forget to feed the pigeons. As you conduct your wars, think of others. Don't forget those who want peace. As you pay your water bill, think of others. Think of those who have only the clouds to drink from. As you go home, your own home, think of others. Don't forget those who live in tents. As you sleep and count the stars, think of others. there are people who have no place to sleep. As you liberate yourself with metaphors, think of others, those who have lost their right to speak. And as you think of distant others, think of yourself and say, I wish I were a candle in the darkness. One of the invitations I'm going to offer today is how might we, or a question I suppose, how might we become that candle in the darkness for our students and our colleagues while at the same time honoring our own heart and our well-being and attending to our well-being. So what I want to do today, I want to reflect back on the previous year and consider how we can move forward. And really throughout the presentation, I want us to consider what it means to center the well-being of the community. So I want to invite you to join me in this, to take this, this poll that I'm going to project. And the first, and it's really a question of how you are. And we're going to put the link in the chat for you to join this poll. It's anonymous. And the intention I have is to center this question of how you are individually, but it will also give us a chance to look at how we are doing as a community. And so Molly just put it in the chat. Thank you, Molly. So my training in higher education or in the education system has been remarkably focused on the intellect, reasons, and the rational aspect of being human, being a student, being an academic. And I remember key moments in my education as an elementary school student, as a middle school student, high school, college, graduate school, postdoc, where I and others were told to put our feelings aside, put our emotions aside. And I remember as a student and even later as a teacher wanting so desperately to erase my emotions, erase my feelings, hide them, so I can be more rational, better decision maker, better problem solver, better scientist. And what that does, it actually does the opposite, because what the science shows, and we've known this for a while now, is that we are not merely rational beings. We're actually, the emotions are critical to our ability to learn, to engage, to think, to process information. And so we would be doing ourselves and our students and our children and our colleagues a huge disservice if we continue to leave feelings and emotion outside of the classroom. What we need to do, we need to figure out a way to work with those feelings and emotions, the positive and the negative, the happy and the not so happy ones, so we could cultivate an environment where learning, meaningful learning, is possible. So I do this activity for several reasons, because I want to know how you're doing. It will shift for me what stories I tell, how much I joke, how much I pause. I also want to give an opportunity to all of you to see that I'm pausing and giving this question the attention it deserves, and to give us a chance to see that in this community right now, when I look at the screen, what I see is that people are feeling overwhelmed. There is excitement and curiosity, and people feel connected, and there's gratitude, but there's anxiety and stress, and there's a sense of exhaustion. And those are important to sit with and consider how the whole is doing. That we could hold two realities: one, I'm grateful, and one, I am overwhelmed. So I want to thank you for participating in this exercise. We're going to have one more mentee in the presentation. But I'm going to go back right now to the PowerPoint and continue. Oh. So I love so much on the front page of O'Donnell Learn, there is this: we reimagine the way learning happens with you. And so I read this and I see that it centers the community, that it is an us process, and it is a perpetual process. In fact, the humans have this beautiful capacity to create and imagine and reimagine. And it is this purpose driven, creative process that allows the brain to thrive, allows the brain to feel connected and to feel a sense of relief. So, I want to focus today on what it means in the midst of trauma and anxiety and people who are feeling overwhelmed, what it means to imagine and reimagine, center the community, be that candle in the darkness. And I'm going to start with the voice of students. So I bring you some work from students from Pima Community College. Several years ago, truthfully, I got tired of hearing people make assumptions about what students want out of their education. And I often heard that students, they just want to get a job, they just want to get an A, they just want to transfer. And it was a very reductionist approach to what students want or desire. And so I decided to conduct a study where I asked students, and we had a really large sample size, to answer, among others, the following question: what is the purpose of higher education? And I'm going to share with you some representative examples of what students came back and said. This is across disciplines, first and second year students. And one student says, to innovate and leave a meaningful impact on my community, to develop skills that can be useful in helping my community, to give back, to stand on my own and help my community, to help myself become a better person so I can give back, to become a better human being. We had over 1,000 participants, and when we were examining this question, it was really the easiest to analyze. And it was the easiest to analyze because the theme of having a purpose that has to do with the community. There is a here, and then there is the community, and there is a strong connection. That theme was powerful. And it reminded me of what Archbishop Desmond Tutu always in his writing talks about our interconnectedness, that we are, my humanity is bound in yours and yours in mine. We belong in a bundle of life. We say a person is a person through other person. So I could speak from a neurobiological perspective, how the brain cares about connection and how the brain is a social organ and how it is the interpersonal neurobiology, a term coined by Dan Siegel, is going to be part of the ingredient for our healings. I could also speak from the wisdom of the elders, such as Desmond Tutu, who speaks about this timeless and ancient reality about our interconnectedness. And I will do both. So we are, in some sense, in uncharted territory. Last year, in March 2020, this report came out from Johns Hopkins, and it was predicting what social distancing is going to do and how it's going to really be challenging and how it's going to challenge people who are on the margins, socioeconomically, geopolitically, even more. That prediction, we've seen it happen. And what I want to say is whether you've been impacted greatly or just briefly by the pandemic, the impact is real. Because perhaps you didn't lose a job, but you watched people lose a job and get evicted and so on. And that wears heavy on the heart because we're empathic, we care, we want to help. The brain will go into a state of survival. Am I going to be next? Right? Earlier this year, this article, among many articles, came out talking about, in this case, they're calling it a pandemic wall. And this pandemic wall is hitting a lot of people. It's not just you or me. Some are calling it languishing, some are calling it exhaustion, pandemic, traumatic disorder. I saw this image and it immediately spoke to me. And the day I saw that image, I happened to be on the side where I had nothing to give, or so I felt that I had nothing to give. And that day, I was also very harsh on myself. I was having this dialogue, to toughen up, having that dialogue. I should know better. I studied trauma after all. I need to use strategy so I could give more. And I remember thinking, I'm being so harsh and I'm not being inclusive and I'm trying to justify physiology. And in the article, one of the things I really like is how they remind us that when we are in a constant state of above average stress, the type of stress that is hard to cope with, there is a biochemical reaction that is going to happen in the body. There are chemicals that will be released, and those chemicals cost us energy. So when someone says, you, me, our colleagues, when they say, I feel like I can't get out of bed, there is an underlying mechanism that is likely happening, right? And so I show this really to remind myself and to remind all of you that it's not as simple as saying, I'm going to toughen up, my students need tough love, I'm going to just suck it up, or you need to suck it up. Those are all wonderful sayings, I suppose, but we also need to honor and respect that there is a biology happening, that we have finite set of energy. And when the energy is directed towards solving a problem that the brain perceives impact our survivability, that energy will be taken away from paying attention in the classroom, or writing your grant, or doing grocery shopping. So take home message here is to really, I invite you to have that self-compassion when you're feeling that pandemic wall or exhaustion, and to afford people that same self-compassion or that same compassion. So what makes the brain feel overwhelmed? And I promise this is not going to be technical. I really want to get into strategies, and I want to take your questions. I want to pause actually here and ask you the following questions. So we're going to go back to Menti. This is the last time we're going to do Menti. And the question that I want you to consider is thinking of yourself. What are you struggling with the most? So from the previous poll, I saw that those of you who took the poll said you're feeling overwhelmed. And my question is, what is the one thing that you're struggling with the most? So I want you to pay attention to the theme that's emerging. There is the workload, frustration, balance. I also see motivation and uncertainty. And so when I see these things, I think, well, the community right here, your biology is working, right? Your body, your brain is supposed it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. It's supposed to be struggling with balance right now, and the uncertainty and the motivation. And I'm going to briefly go over those. So I do this exercise again because I want to know, I want to gauge where the community is. I also want to give you a chance to see that you're not alone, right? So back to the question, what makes the brain feel overwhelmed? The brain evolved to connect. We're social creatures. Neuroscientists describe the brain as a social organ. We thrive when we make connections. We know from research that students engage if what we're presenting to them in the classroom has connection to something that matters to them. What happened over the past year and a half, and in some cases it's been happening before, we've had ingredients that make it really difficult for the brain to connect and integrate. If you go and research what is it, what are the factors that are making people struggle the most over the past year and a half, there are 4 themes that emerge. Physiology. I was speaking with my doctor, and she said she's seen this overwhelming number of patients who are asking to be referred to for back pain or neck pain. So we've gone from having a routine we walk, we exercise, we meet each other at the coffee room or the break room. We had to come up with a new routine with little movement or no movement. It impacted our body language. It impacted our physiology. And now we have to change that routine by going back. So that's one theme. The other theme is, and we know this from a theoretical, and actually there's a lot of research, what happens when we go in isolation. And some of us experience the isolation to different degrees. But what happens when the brain feels that isolation? It impacts the sense of self, because I am me in relation to my surroundings. Impact the sense of self, impacts our ability to have the mental model of the world. It impacts our ability to hold on to meanings. Why? Our peers reinforce our sense of self and the world and the future. So a lot of students, what I heard again and again since the pandemic hit is, what does this mean? Does anything matter? The question of, what is the meaning? And the brain struggles when we don't have, when it doesn't, actually, it can be scary for the brain if it feels not connected and also there is no meaning. Now, the most remarkable factor is this ongoing uncertainty. And if you've attended some of my sessions or read some of my work, I talk about how the brain has been described as a predictive machine. The brain is constantly gathering information from the surroundings to paint a model of survivability, what's going to happen next, and we want to be in control. After all, the brain is there to keep us alive. So the ongoing uncertainty combined with the isolation, the loss of meaning, is the physiology has been really overwhelming. We would be doing a disservice to ourselves and the community if we stop there and say those are the factors that are making it really difficult for us, that are making us feel exhausted. And there are other factors that are pre-existing, and the pandemic exacerbated them. Poverty. We know that experiencing poverty, it impacts our brain development. It impacts the stress response, activates a stress response. Again, think about survivability. Think about the energy, the finite energy that we have. Racism, we know that a minute form of racism, microaggression, right? This lumping people and making assumptions about them. We know that is really stressful on the brain. It activates a stress response. It causes cortisol to spike up. Why? Because the brain wants to connect and belong. Why? So we know if something happens, we have a community, we matter to others, they will help us. And when we experience racism and rejection and microaggression, whether I experience it or I see others experience it and I feel like I can't do anything about it, it sends a message to the brain. It asks the brain, do I matter? Am I going to be okay? Are people going to help me? Am I going to be next? Right? Really stressful. So that was there. It's been exacerbated by the pandemic. And then, of course, the climate crisis. And so I have a family member that says to me, anywhere I turn, there is pain and trauma and suffering. And she said, and I feel overwhelmed, and I also feel guilty because I have a job and I have so many blessings, And I say, well, you know, and you also feel, and you also care. And so it makes sense that you're having all those emotions at the same time. So we're dealing with a lot of stress. I am not talking about the stress that makes you feel maybe slightly agitated, makes you feel tired, and then you go to sleep and then you wake up and it's all set. I'm talking about the stress. If this is the stress response where we measure performance, academic performance, athletic performance versus how much stress there is, we reach a level where the stress causes our body to feel into a state of exhaustion. What do I mean by this? This is the type where you can't cope anymore. Your energy just is there to keep you alive. And that energy is taken away from what? Problem solving, creativity, this and that, learning, right? So when the stress becomes unmanageable, the brain is going to prioritize survival over engagement and learning. So if you experienced over the past year and a half days where you feel like you can't concentrate, you don't remember anything, you feel you start replying to an email and it takes you forever, right? I want you to think of your stress and think of this notion of this finite energy, and if we don't replenish, we can't just, how can we keep going? And undoubtedly our students are feeling that way too. And one of the things I've struggled with is we have these sessions of trauma informed this or teaching the whole student, and they're wonderful and they're designed for teachers and educators. One of the things I've struggled with is, what about the students? Who's having these conversations with the students? So the question is, how do we heal? How do we move forward? Now, I am not here to just share with you negative information, that we're under stress, that there's trauma. I'm also here to say that, and there are ways we could move forward. And there, we can definitely learn and engage and thrive. But we need an intervention. Is learning possible? Absolutely. The brain is plastic. The brain is brilliant. The traumas that we suffer, the psychological trauma, there is a purpose. It's to keep us alive. Our anxiety is meant to protect us. The brain is trying to protect us. Right? So the answer is yes, but we need an intervention. And I am not here to speak about change your curriculum, change this, change that. No, I'm going to share with you a really simple message. And the simple message is, how can we become intentional in our work with our students, with our colleagues, with our family members, where we help them feel safe, connected, purposeful. It is only then, when the brain starts relaxing into learning. I tell the story of how this past semester I probably gave the most challenging physiology exam in my entire career. I look back at it and I think, I wrote a really tough exam. And the average on the exam was 89%. The students had A's and B's, right? And I was really proud of them, so amazed. And what happened? So I challenged them more than I usually do, but I spend a lot of time doing that helping them and myself feel safe and connected and purposeful. So we could take the chances to fail, to learn, to grow, all of these things. I know that the teachers are the front line right now in a way. You're overwhelmed, exhausted, you just overworked. And I recognize that. And so I'm not here to say, do this and do that. I'm here to remind you that what we need when we are struggling, sometimes it's just a reminder, someone to remind me that they see me, that we have a common humanity. And those things we could do by just the way we reply to our students, or the way we smile and look at them, or the way we just say, I know this is tough. And in the process, what we can begin to see, I hope, is that it gives back this intentionality to create this sanctuary, if you will, gives back to us. So when the brain is under the influence of strong negative emotions, because there is limited energy, the neural circuitry is actually changes. And it changes in a way where information is prevented from going to the prefrontal cortex, that's our rational brain, and it stays stuck within the limbic and the brain stem. So when we calm the nervous system, it is an opportunity to shift back where we are not stuck in that limbic hijack or limbic break. Now, it's really critical for the teachers to start with themselves. I know this because the brain is a social organ. Emotions are contagious. When I walk into a classroom and I'm agitated and as much as I try to hide it, my students pick that up. And vice versa. So we need to figure out a plan, a way to help calm our nervous system down, and also make sure that we in a way protect ourselves so we don't pick up all the emotions that our students bring with them. So I want to pause right here and see if there are any questions before I go further. And going further, I'm going to talk about strategies, but I want to see what questions are coming up.
And folks, feel free to put a question into the chat, or we do have a raised hand. Is it Jamila? Although I don't see the hand up anymore. Oh, yes, go ahead.
That was an accident. I apologize.
Oh, okay, understandable. Thank you. And I've scanned back. I'm not seeing anything prior.
Okay. So let's continue, and we'll have, do we have 17 minutes left, Brett? I just want to make sure.
Yes.
Okay. So this intervention that I am talking about, I said that what can we do to create that sanctuary for ourselves and our students, right? Now, one approach is to use this trauma-informed care. And this trauma-informed care, I'll explain it. But first I want to define trauma. And here we're talking about psychological trauma. So psychological trauma can be one event or a series of events. It could happen here and now, or it could have happened in the previous generation. And I've inherited it from my parents through epigenetics. It could happen to me, or I witness it happen to someone else. The brain perceives the event as something threatening, and it takes away the brain's ability to cope and to be in control. It puts us in a state of helplessness. And what happens is the brain is going to exert a lot of energy to try to keep us alive. Whether the situation is imminent or not, it's how the brain perceives it. So the trauma-informed care says what? It says, I realize that trauma is pervasive and it impacts people. And it's there. People are struggling. Look at yourself. Look at your family. People are struggling. Look at the data that's emerging about how many people are just really struggling, right? When we struggle and when we're experiencing some kind of trauma, we could recognize that it's going to impact our behavior. How? We behave sometimes in a way where it's very rigid, or it's very, very lax, very laid back. So if a student, and I had this, really gets very upset if the slightest change happen in the class, right? It's because they have no energy. Their brain feels they have no energy to now reshift their plans. Conversely, if a student doesn't meet deadline, they fall asleep in class, this and that and the other, right? They're likely exhausted, and the brain just perhaps goes into a disengaged state. How do we respond? Responding by, again, the safety, the connection, the meaning, the purpose, to unequivocally let our students and our colleagues know, I see you, you matter. You're not a number, right? I am on your side. Resisting re-traumatization. One of the main things I'm going to say is make no assumption. Don't make assumptions. Don't think you know where your students are and their struggle and what they can and cannot do. And so get to know the students is an important thing. Don't ignore the cultural and the historical background. So I talked about those. In a trauma-informed education, I'll just say again that we know that the students come to us with experiences, past and present, and those experiences impact how the students interact and learn and memorize and take an exam. So we must be able to recognize the trauma in ourselves, again, because of that emotional contagion. And what do? We want to promote safety and provide resources and connections and empowerment. Part of the trauma is we feel a sense of helplessness. Our sense of agency is impacted, autonomy. And so how can we introduce in our courses opportunities where the student has a choice, for example? So I was going to do an exercise on tell me what you've heard with respect to misconceptions about trauma-informed education, or what specifically you struggle with trauma-informed education, but in the interest of time and because I want to share with you some practical strategies, I'm going to skip that, but I do have a list of some of the top misconceptions that when we do trauma-informed education, there is no academic expectation, or it's only for high poverty schools, and those are all misconceptions. Trauma doesn't really distinguish. Sure, it impacts people on the margins more. We want to have a structure in a trauma-informed education because the brain can predict the structure and its positive reinforcement. We would be doing a disservice to our students if we said nothing goes, no exams, no academic challenge. There's nothing about lowering my expectations of my students. It's about the social and the emotional. So we can challenge our students. So psychological trauma is very much relational. It shatters our assumptions about the goodness of the world. Think about, you see something horrible happen and you think, I can't believe people don't care. Why aren't people saying something? Why, right? It wears heavy on us. So it shatters, it challenges meaningfulness of the world, our sense of self and self-worth. So it's very relational. The healing is also relational. So we heal through relationships, meaningful, trusting relationships. There is a lot of research from K through 12 that shows that students who grew up in poverty, who experienced racism, who experienced their parents, struggle, and maybe they were in foster care and so on. We know that those factors can act as a predictor of how the student's going to do later on in life. Those that thrive, they had what they call an anchor. And that anchor could be a teacher or a grandmother that continued to let that student know, I see you, you matter, I got your back, right? So relationships can be really powerful. When students come to our classroom, to our institutions, we're not just there to impart knowledge. It's not that they're an empty vessel and we just pour everything. No, they come to us with relationships and identities. And what we want to do is we want to work on those, strengthening them. So safety, meaningful connection, and how can we offer support? The most important thing about safety is not to make assumptions about the students or about our colleagues. Get to know them. More specifically, how can we reduce uncertainty? The most important thing is to, again, don't leave your students wondering whether you care about them or not. Let them know you do. You're more than a number. Their names, their pronouns, let them know that this is an us journey. This could be just one simple sentence you write at the beginning of your email and you remind them. So one of reducing uncertainty is, let's try not to overwhelm our students and colleagues with information, right? Create some kind of predictable structure. So when I know that every Monday I need to do this and every Thursday I need to do that, and I do it, it sends positive reinforcement to the brain. We want to communicate, but not just for the sake of communication. We want to communicate regularly and invite communication. So with my students, I say, write me a note at the end of class on a post-it note. And so initially what I'm doing is I'm making them communicate with me. I'm trying to build a culture of two ways. And then by the middle of the semester, they come to me on their own. In your communication, language is really powerful. Model empathy and reassurance. Remind them that it's still an us journey. You're still there to support them. And you understand these are difficult times. When the brain is struggling, the sense of why becomes really important to be intentional about. And so when you give an assignment, in addition to the how to do it and when to do it, why the assignment is important. With respect to connections, we want to facilitate it, but detach from the outcome. Why? People have been in isolation. I'm not going to make the assumption that I'm going to make group work and so on, and people just want to get back into. So I have to be mindful of that. How do we cultivate communities? I have no doubt that you do all this work excellently. And so again, just some examples with you. When students come to us, they don't come as an empty vessel. They come with cultures and stories and wisdoms their grandmother gave them and background that enriches our classroom. When they come, let them know that you want those stories. You want those wonderful problem-solving strategies that they learned on the playground. Incorporate it into your class so the students see themselves in the community. Have them work on a problem related to the community together. When we reflect together, wonder together, create together, it forms a strong bond. And ask the students, you're going to have some students who are not in class. Learn each other's names. Check up on them. I tell my students, imagine you think no one knows your name and you miss class and your classmates write you and say, are you okay? Do you want to use my notes? Right? How uplifting that can be. Meaning and purpose are really important. So one thing we could do is help our students, help our colleagues identify short-term and long-term goals. Your goal this semester, by the end of this week, is to complete this assignment. And then when they complete it, remind them that they completed it, celebrate it, sends positive reinforcement to our brains. On a post-it note, on a difficult week, I write, when my goal is to get to the end of this week. And then I get to it. I mean, it's a silly goal. It's like I'm trying to trick my brain. I get to it and I think, oh, I did it. Right? The relationship, the why in relation to the community. And celebrating the journey. Yes, we're going to bear witness to the trauma and the difficulties and the struggle. And it's really important also to celebrate the resilience, those little milestones. Students need that. We need that. And in the last time, in the remaining 3 minutes, what I want to talk about is this notion of what it means to bear witness. When we bear witness, we speak to the truth of something. We advocate for it. So what does it mean to center well-being? Let's bring the feeling into the classroom. How are you feeling? How's your family doing? Make it a culture where students ask each other, how are you? Where students ask you, how are you? Normalize mental breaks. So for a long time, what I've done in my classes, I have part of the syllabus, part of the course schedule. One day is a mental health day. I honor that. the students know that it's not an after thing. There's a crisis, we're going to have a mental health. No, it requires its own time, right? I talk about it. I invite a counselor to my classroom at the beginning of the semester. Tell me why mental health gets challenged. What can we do about it? I ask questions. I have the students program phone numbers in there, and so they can. I want to destigmatize it. I'm intentional to talk about my own struggle and what I do about it. Not so I could burden the students, but so I could let them see there's no shame, that it's part of being human. And I also celebrate the positive emotions. I'm so grateful you're here. And I mean it. I actually, if I say it without like pausing and meaning it, I feel like it has no effect. I pause and I say, I'm so glad you came back to my students. And some of them think like I'm crazy, but that's okay. But I'm trying again to just bring in an intentional way positive emotions. Why? They help relax the brain. We know what happens when we are experiencing gratitude in the brain. We need to pause. A lot of you said, I feel overworked, lack of balance. The Nigerian philosopher and scholar Bayo Akumulafe says, times are urgent. We need to pause. That pausing is going to be different for different people. For some of us is asking the question why it's important to bear witness to our traumas and resilience and others. But also part of the pausing is this pausing to examine, use our positionality, our authority, to examine how the systems are working for some but not others, and advocate for more humane, kind, purposeful systems. And I'm going to end with this. And if I could just have 3 minutes of your time, I would be so grateful. It's really important to cultivate the hope and the moral imagination. What I mean by the moral imagination is to know that what I do here and now has an impact in the future. And I hope for a better future for my colleagues and my students. And students are really struggling now. Everywhere they turn, negative, negative, negative. They're struggling with confidence in meaning and the goodness and purpose and community. And so part of our work is to help them hold on to some sense of hope in the future, in a better future. Now, I struggle with hope, even though I write about it. Sometimes I think it's obsolete. Sometimes I think. So over the summer, I did a lot of research and soul searching and reading. And one of the things I came across is an interview with James Baldwin. And he says, I live a hope despite my knowing better. This essay, in combination with another one by another brilliant and often misunderstood person, Colin Kaepernick, he tells a story of why he continued to kneel, and he connects it to students. He connects it to students in a locker room in a Los Angeles high school and listening to their struggles and hope and aspiration. And he says, we resist out of love. At the root of our resistance is love. So to continue to hope despite knowing better is to resist going back to the status quo where higher ed served some and didn't serve others. Educators and students to resist to go back to that status quo. And it's really the love for humanity and love for beauty and our fellow human beings and the earth that is at the root of our resistance. And that is my invitation to you. And I'm so grateful you joined me today. And I hope you know how much I see you and you matter. And with that, I will stop.
Sorry, let me get my microphone on. Thank you, Dr. Ahmad. And if you have a chance to look at the chat, so many of the things that you were saying have really resonated with folks. And, from you sort of the theoretical to the practical strategies, and then just the grounding in, the student experience and all of our experiences. So I would encourage you, if you have time, to take a look at some of those comments. I'm very grateful. At this time, I want to thank everybody for your participation. And again, thank you, Dr. Ahmad, for a wonderful session. I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie briefly, just for a quick update as to upcoming events.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again, Dr. Ahmad. That was a fantastic session. And I just wanted to give you an update, if I can bear with me for one moment. Sorry about that. I just wanted to give you an update. Thank you so much for a great conversation. For next week, we have actually 3 sessions. We have on Tuesday, December 21st at 12 noon, September 21st at 12 noon, we have student voices on mental health and learning. On Wednesday, we have a really great impact conversation with the University of North Carolina system staff, where they'll be discussing how they their mental health first aid initiative called Healthy Minds and Strong Learnings, charting a course to a more aware community and sustainable mental health care. And on Thursday, our colleagues at ISG will be hosting a program called Student Support Coaching, a University Superpower. And that's on Thursday, the 23rd at 12. And so thank you all for being with us. Please join our Slack channel and also fill out the survey that Molly has added to the chat. So thank you so much, and we'll see you all next week.